Hercule Poirot unravels the desert caravan. Intrigue. Chapter 1. A Death in the Wadi. The sun over the Sahara does not set so much as it surrenders, slowly, solemnly, gilding every dune in molten amber, before vanishing behind a horizon that never ends. In that vast, breathless stillness where the sand keeps secrets as ancient as time, the caravan made camp for the night. 12 travellers, 11 would dine, 1 would not rise again. They called it the El Chesra Cultural Trek, a most fashionable expedition into North Africa's more romantic wilds. For those who could afford it, aristocrats, professors, collectors, and columnists, it offered a temporary escape into a world of sun-bleached relics and the illusion of peril. Beneath rose-coloured scarves and shaded tents, the travellers carried leather-bound notebooks, exotic cigarettes, and private rivalries. The heart of the expedition was Sir Lucian Willoughby, financier, patron, and, some whispered, something of a bully. Broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and addicted to both control and apricot liqueur, Sir Lucien had taken to the desert with the confidence of a man who believed history was something to be owned. He spent his afternoons correcting his guides, berating the cook, and sketching vague maps of hidden ruins he claimed had come from a long-dead French informant. On this particular evening, he sat alone in his tent, sipping liqueur, listening to opera, and muttering in low, bitter tones as the others gathered by the fire ring. Miss Eleanor Halberd, hair tied in a red scarf, had just finished describing the hypnotic cruelty of the Sahara in her travel journal. She caught a glimpse of Sir Lucian through the slit in his canvas flap, pacing in agitation, his hands trembling slightly. "Still barking at shadows," she murmured to no one in particular. Not far from her sat Basil Renton, a dry academic from Oxford, who had joined the trek hoping to examine pre-Islamic ruins. He polished his spectacles anxiously, muttering about cataloguing methods and worrying over a misplaced artifact he had planned to present to the British Museum. Eleanor had caught him snapping at a guide earlier that day. Something about a dagger, she thought. Something ancient. Lady Constance Willoughby, elegant and pale, was unusually quiet that evening. Her gaze was locked on the fire, her shawl drawn tight around her slender frame. She had not spoken to her husband in hours. Some thought she was cold. Others wondered what it was she endured in silence. And young Michael Lennox, lean and tanned, sat apart with his camera and tripod, winding film and watching the group through narrowed eyes. His photographs, he claimed, would become part of a book, Vanishing Horizons. He was quick with a joke, quicker with a lens, but slower to trust. The Bedouin guides moved noiselessly through the camp, setting up lanterns and extinguishing the cook fires. It was nearly time for dinner when it happened. A scream, sharp, singular. Eleanor stood first, then Michael dropping his lens. Then Captain Lawrence Faversham, whose military instincts hadn't dulled despite years of civilian tourism. The scream had come from Sir Lucian's tent. Faversham reached it first and pulled back the flap. The others heard his breath catch. Inside, Sir Lucian lay slumped in his camp chair, his spine grotesquely arched backward. A dagger, black, stone-like, impossibly smooth, protruded from the base of his neck. The gramophone still spun, warbling the final measures of Visi Dart in tragic irony. For a moment no one spoke. The desert had returned to silence. Then Renton whispered, "That's the ceremonial blade. It was missing from my chest last night." "What chest?" Eleanor asked sharply. "The travelling case, the antiquities I was studying." His voice shook. "It's not a weapon, it's the 7th century, decorative." "Well," Eleanor muttered, "it's done something rather decisive now." The group convened, dazed and defensive. Captain Faversham, his jaw clenched, assumed command. "No one leaves the camp, not a step beyond the fire ring. We'll await the authorities." "And how long might that take?" Eleanor asked. "We're 2 days' ride from the nearest telegraph." Lady Constance stared at the sand. Her lips parted, but no words came. That night, dinner was untouched. A lantern near Sir Lucien's tent guttered out in the wind, and Renton began scribbling panicked notes in the margins of his notebook. Eleanor crossed and recrossed her legs, gazing up at the stars like they might offer explanations. Michael developed photographs in his tent, hands trembling slightly. Only one voice broke the silence, carried by a camel guide returning from a supply rendezvous. "A gentleman approaches," the guide reported. "He comes alone. A foreigner, small in stature, fine moustache. He says his name is Monsieur Hercule Poirot." A collective breath shifted. Eleanor smiled grimly. "Well, let's hope his reputation isn't just continental gossip." The murder in the desert had found its audience, and the desert, wide and empty as it was, would soon become the theatre for an exquisite unmasking. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The arrival of Hercule Poirot was as understated as the man himself was not. At first light, a single camel crested the dune line, its rider sitting unnaturally straight, as if posture could repel dust. Poirot dismounted with the help of a stunned guide, removed his travel hat with delicate fingers, and examined the camp as one might examine a crime scene laid bare on a chessboard. His white linen suit had resisted the journey better than any man's nerves could have. His moustache, symmetrical, waxed, and fiercely proud, appeared to possess its own moral authority. Captain Faversham stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Poirot offered a thin smile. "Ah, but mon capitaine, when one receives a telegram marked urgent and murder, one does not linger over tea in Marrakech. One pack, one travels, one arrives, before the trail grows cold." Without further delay, he requested to see the body. The interior of Sir Lucien's tent was untouched, save for a cloth now draped respectfully over the corpse. Poirot removed it gently. He examined the body, his eyes narrowing. "The dagger, it has not been moved?" he asked. "No," said Faversham. "We've preserved everything. No one has entered the tent since last night." "Bon." Poirot crouched carefully. His gloved hands hovered over the wound without touching. It is not merely an object. It is a statement, precision, anger, possibly even symbolism. Poirot stood. His gaze swept the space. There was the upturned camp chair, a trail of spilled liqueur, and a shattered teacup in the corner, though no tray and no second glass. A pile of maps sat beside the gramophone, many of them marked in red pencil with odd symbols. Some were copies of ancient trade routes, others more fanciful, suggesting places that may never have existed. Poirot knelt by the spilled drink. Apricot liqueur, quite pungent. But observe, the decanter is on the side table, no sign of a second glass, so he was not entertaining. Faversham nodded grimly. He was alone. Perhaps, perhaps not. Poirot turned to the gramophone. It had wound down sometime during the night. He looked at the record sleeve, then at the disc itself. Puccini, passionate, grandiose, and very final. He muttered something in French before replacing the cloth over the body. Poirot stepped outside the tent. The camp was already stirring. Eleanor Halberd was jotting notes beneath a canvas awning. Basil Renton pored over a battered reference book, barely disguising his glances toward Poirot. Michael Lennox stood near the camels, smoking too quickly. Lady Constance had not yet emerged. Poirot cleared his throat. "Captain Faversham, I will need to speak with each member of the party, separately, in a place not yet haunted by death." The captain nodded. "The dining tent? Neutral ground." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perfect. Let us begin." The dining tent was modest, Persian rugs underfoot, a folding table, brass lanterns swaying slightly. Poirot took a seat at the far end, a fresh notebook and fountain pen laid before him. First came Miss Eleanor Halberd. She entered briskly, her scarf now tied tighter than before. She sat without invitation. "You must understand," she began, "I'm a journalist, not a suspect. I heard the scream, I saw nothing, and I was with Basil at the time. We were arguing about the ethics of excavation." Poirot inclined his head. "And what was your opinion of Sir Lucien?" She hesitated. "Arrogant. The sort of man who believes money replaces charm. But not murder-worthy, if that's what you're implying. And your profession, mademoiselle, it allows you insight into people, does it not?" Her eyes narrowed. "I observe. I don't invent." Poirot tapped his pen. "And in your observations, who seemed most upset by Sir Lucien's death?" Eleanor glanced toward the tent flap. "Lady Constance hasn't spoken since last night, but perhaps that's grief, or relief, hard to say." He let her go with a nod. Next came Basil Renton. His hands trembled as he sat, and he adjusted his spectacles 4 times in the first minute. "Sir Lucien funded part of my research," he said quickly. "We had disagreements, scholarly ones, but I assure you I had no reason to harm him." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you reported a missing dagger, n'est-ce pas?" Renton flushed. "Yes, but it wasn't a weapon. It's pre-Islamic, likely ceremonial, made of volcanic glass. I hadn't even catalogued it. And now it's—" "In someone's neck," Poirot finished calmly. "And only your hands had access?" Renton hesitated. "Technically, anyone could have unfastened the chest. But yes, I was responsible." Poirot scribbled a note. Michael Lennox followed. He carried his camera with him, as if it were armor. "You take photographs of everyone, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "Of everything. Part of the expedition's record." "Have you reviewed your negatives since the murder?" Michael's brow furrowed. "Some. Why?" "You may have captured more than you realized." Poirot leaned in. "And did you observe any quarrels, tensions?" Michael looked away. "Lucien fought with his wife yesterday. Something about inheritance. She threw a book at him." "Ah." Poirot leaned back. "That is useful." Lady Constance came last. She entered quietly, face pale, hands gloved. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you have suffered a terrible shock." She said nothing. "Was your marriage happy?" Her lips barely moved. "What has that to do with anything?" "Everything," Poirot said gently. "Because someone has killed your husband. And they did so not from impulse, but design." She stood abruptly. "I wish to be left alone." Poirot did not stop her. He only watched. As the tent emptied, he folded his notebook and exhaled. He had spoken with 4. Already inconsistencies bloomed like cracks beneath the surface, and though he had not yet seen all the players, the game had begun. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspect. The sun had fully risen now, and with it came the first waves of heat, not merely of the desert, but of suspicion. Poirot, ever meticulous, requested that the entire group gather beneath the main awning for a formal briefing. Captain Faversham obliged, calling each name with military precision, as if to confirm their continued presence, or to ensure none had vanished into the dunes. One by one they assembled, a half-circle of guarded faces. Poirot stood at the centre, arms folded behind his back, surveying them all like an orchestra conductor preparing for the overture. "My friends," he began, "a man has been murdered. That much we know. The method was brutal, yet the setting so very civilized. It is this contradiction that fascinates me." His voice was calm, yet heavy with implication. "I ask you now, not for confessions," he continued, "but for your cooperation. We are far from the world. No police, no courts, only sand and silence. Until the authorities arrive, we are each other's witnesses and each other's alibis." His eyes flicked from face to face. "I must understand each of you, not just what you did, but who you are. Murder, you see, is often personal, long before it is practical." There was an uneasy shuffle among the group. Poirot allowed a pause, letting silence press in before he continued. "Let us begin with introductions. Formal, yes, but truthful, if you please." Lady Constance Willoughby stood first, regal despite the dark rings beneath her eyes. Her voice was soft, clipped. "Constance Elizabeth Willoughby, formerly Constance Delaford, married Sir Lucian 12 years ago. I studied art history in Paris. I did not enjoy this expedition." Poirot inclined his head. "And your husband? What was he seeking?" Her lips tightened. "A legacy, something that would outlive him. He feared being forgotten." Poirot murmured, "Many do." He said no more, allowing her to sit. Captain Lawrence Faversham followed. He stood ramrod straight, arms behind his back. Lawrence Faversham, retired from the Royal Engineers, organized this journey through my company, Falcon Horizon, hired by Sir Lucien to arrange safe travel. Poirot raised a brow. "Were you acquainted prior to this journey?" "We met 3 months ago. He was demanding, but paid well." "A fair trade," Poirot murmured. Miss Eleanor Halberd rose next, brushing sand from her long linen skirt. "Eleanor Halberd, I write for Wanderlust Weekly. I've covered temples in Burma and shipwrecks in the Aegean. Sir Lucien invited me along to document the glory of his expedition. I suspect he expected flattery." "And did he receive it?" "I'm not in the business of fiction, monsieur." A faint smile touched Poirot's lips. "On the contrary, I find journalists are excellent novelists, often without realizing it." Professor Basil Renton cleared his throat. He stood awkwardly as if uncertain whether to bow or not. "Basil Renton, lecturer in ancient history, Oxford. I've corresponded with Sir Lucien intermittently over the years. He was always more collector than scholar." Poirot gestured to the others. "You and Miss Halberd argued yesterday?" Renton blinked. "Yes, well, ethical disagreements. She accused me of academic imperialism." "And were you guilty of it?" Renton coughed. "It depends how one defines imperialism. I find murder to be more easily defined," Poirot said simply. Renton sat, flushed. Michael Lennox was last. He did not stand. He slouched in a folding chair, camera resting across his lap like a rifle. "Michael Lennox, photographer, hired to document the expedition. I'm nobody important." Poirot gave a small, deliberate nod. "Sometimes, monsieur, it is the least noticed who notice the most, and that can be very important." There was an almost imperceptible flicker of discomfort in Lennox's eyes. Poirot turned to the guides, all seated apart, quiet and stoic. "And the local men, they are accounted for?" Faversham spoke up. "They sleep in a separate ring of tents. No one entered the main camp during the night. I've confirmed it." Poirot gave a small shrug. "That, monsieur, is what you believe, but even truths in the desert may shift like sand." There was a rustle among the guests. Poirot stepped back. "Now I make no accusations, not yet, but already I begin to see—" He tapped his temple lightly. "Who is nervous? Who is too calm? Who is watching others too carefully? who pretends to care more than they do." His voice dropped to a low murmur. "Murder reveals, always, even in silence." With that, he bowed slightly and left the group to their murmurs and speculation. Behind him, the desert wind stirred again. The morning heat was rising, but it was the tension in the camp that truly blistered. Already the lines had begun to draw themselves, the widow who would not weep. The scholar was too eager to correct. The journalist who knew too much. The guide with military discipline, the photographer who saw in stillness, and Poirot, who missed nothing at all. The caravan, once a place of wonder, had become a crucible, and somewhere among them a killer watched, and waited. Chapter 4, Poirot observes for Hercule. Poirot deduction began, not with facts, but with behavior. After the formal gathering, he took a solitary walk around the camp perimeter, not for the air, which was dry and stifling, nor the scenery, which held no surprises after the seventh identical dune. No, Poirot's purpose was internal. It was to arrange what he had seen, not what he had been told. Already the facts presented themselves poorly. Sir Lucien had died alone, or so it was claimed, struck from behind by a dagger that had been missing from the professor's locked artifact chest, a ceremonial blade misappropriated in violence. Yet no one had heard an argument, a struggle, or footsteps. No witness had seen anyone enter or leave his tent. And no one, not even the widow, had offered a reaction consistent with true shock. Poirot found a shaded bench near the water barrels where a trickle of breeze passed beneath the tent flaps. He sat with his notebook but did not write. He watched. Lady Constance had returned to her tent. Yet Poirot noted that she had not drawn the flaps fully. Through the opening, her shadow moved in short, rigid steps. Once she sat, then stood, sat again. Poirot deduced the gestures of someone rehearsing. Not grief, but something more constructed. Eleanor Halberd sat cross-legged beneath a date palm, scribbling into her leather-bound journal. But Poirot observed how often she paused, not to think but to watch. Her eyes were quick, following movements with an intensity she disguised as detachment. She wrote with purpose, but not just as a writer, as a recorder, a witness. Basil Renton had taken to his small travel desk, unpacking what remained of his artifact chest. He laid out each item on a woven mat, a silver oil lamp, a cluster of beads, fragments of parchment, and the empty velvet slot where the dagger had once rested. He catalogued with trembling hands, lips moving silently. But Poirot had already noted a subtle detail. The edges of the dagger slot had no dust. It had not been missing for long. Michael Lennox, camera slung low, paced near the camels. He fiddled endlessly with his shutter, winding, unwinding, pressing without film. Poirot noticed the man's gaze lingered longer on the Bedouin guides than on his fellow travellers. At one point, he moved to the edge of the dunes, crouching low to photograph shadows rather than people. Poirot found that curious. Lastly, Captain Faversham stood near the supply crates, issuing orders with forced composure. His voice barked discipline, but the crumpled note in his shirt pocket, which he kept touching, then withdrawing from, suggested something unsaid. Poirot closed his eyes. Each player was assembling their version of innocence. And yet innocence was never that organized. It did not rehearse, record, polish, or avoid. Innocence did not try so hard to appear. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested a second inspection of the crime scene, this time without interruption. Faversham obliged, though he lingered at the entrance as if unwilling to surrender full control. Poirot entered slowly. The The body had been removed, respectfully stored in the shaded medical tent, but everything else remained untouched. He stood in the center of the room, the overturned chair, the spilled liqueur, the broken teacup, the gramophone needle resting in its groove like a sentence paused, and then his eyes narrowed. Poirot stepped carefully around the carpet and crouched low, inspecting the side table. There were only 3 items: a cigar box, the decanter, and a leather-bound sketchbook. He picked up the sketchbook and flipped through it. Inside, hand-drawn maps, not ancient or copied, but imagined. Sir Lucian had marked locations that did not exist, drawn symbols no historian would recognize. Some pages had titles in French, others in a cipher. At least 2 maps were identical in terrain but labeled with different names. And then, near the back, a list. A list of surnames, 5 in total. Poirot read them slowly. He smiled. A small, tight smile that meant nothing to anyone but himself, and tucked the notebook under his arm. Back outside, the sun was beginning to bend westward. Shadows lengthened. Silence returned. Poirot approached Faversham. The sketchbook, it belonged to Sir Lucian. Yes, he worked on it nightly, claimed it was research. Poirot nodded. And no one else had access? Not to my knowledge. Poirot looked once more at the camp. Then, with that ever-precise tone of polite finality, he said, "You will kindly ask the guests to remain in their quarters tonight. The killer, I think, is not yet done acting." Faversham frowned. "You think they'll strike again?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Non, mon capitaine. I think they already have." But he said no more. Instead, he walked alone toward the far side of camp, where the shadows were longest and the wind carried only the sound of shifting sand. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The evening was closing in again, and with it came the sharp drop in temperature that marked the desert's strange rhythm. Blistering by day, unforgivingly cold by night. Lanterns flickered against the canvas walls of the dining tent, and the air smelled faintly of mint tea and kerosene. Inside, Poirot prepared for his next phase. The table was cleared of meals. A single chair sat across from him, angled slightly. Not confrontational, but purposeful. He had requested that each guest arrive alone, and that no one linger after their conversation. The others, curious but obedient, remained near their tents under the watchful eye of Captain Faversham. Poirot folded his hands. His notes were neatly stacked beside him, but he made no move to read them. He did not need paper to recall words. What interested him was how those words were delivered. First to enter was Lady Constance Willoughby. She moved like a ghost in silk, elegant, restrained. Her gloves were back on, though the desert heat had not yet abated. She sat without waiting for invitation, her chin lifted, eyes unreadable. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "I do not wish to speak of grief. Grief clouds things. I ask instead about clarity, memory, detail, things only you would have noticed." She looked at him coolly. "You believe I know something. I believe you saw your husband last, and how a man behaves in his final hour is never without meaning." She said nothing for a moment. Then, with a voice like brittle paper, she spoke. He was restless. He drank too much. He played the same aria on repeat. He spoke of a discovery, something that would make his name. I didn't ask what it was. Poirot tilted his head. "And did he speak of anyone else? Any concerns? Warnings?" He said, "They all want a piece of it." "A piece of what?" She shrugged. "Legacy. Wealth. I stopped listening long ago." Poirot studied her. "Forgive me, madame, but you do not seem broken." "I was broken years ago, Monsieur Poirot. I've simply adjusted to the shape." He watched her go with narrowed eyes. Next came Basil Renton. He entered with a nervous energy, as if summoned to face an academic board. He held a sheaf of papers clutched to his chest. "I've written a brief overview of the dagger," he said, placing it on the table. "If it helps." Poirot glanced at it, but didn't touch it. "Tell me instead, monsieur, when you discovered it was missing." "Yesterday morning. I assumed it was a misplacement. Perhaps one of the porters had moved it for safety during travel." "But you said nothing until after the murder." "I thought it would turn up." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did you speak with Sir Lucien that day?" "Briefly. He asked about carbon dating. He was impatient. He thought my process too slow." "Did you quarrel?" "No more than usual." Poirot leaned in. "Do you consider him a thief, Monsieur Renton?" Renton flushed. "I considered him opportunistic. He liked to put his name on discoveries, even if they weren't his." "A motive for anger." "A motive for caution," Renton corrected. "I didn't trust him." "Did you fear him?" Renton paused. "Not until I realized what he might have found." Poirot made no comment. He dismissed Renton with a nod, filing away the implication. Michael Lennox came next. He entered with his usual informal gait, all sunburnt charm and restless energy. But this time Poirot noticed something else. The camera was gone. "You've left your companion behind," Poirot said mildly. Lennox smiled, thin and tired. "It's locked up for the night. I even know when to stop documenting." "But you don't stop watching, I think. That is your habit, your gift." Lennox shrugged. "Photography's just looking harder than most people bother." "Then look hard now, monsieur. Who here frightens you?" Michael looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Renton's the obvious type, always looking over his shoulder. Faversham's too rigid, the kind of man who could bury a secret for the Queen and country." "And Lady Constance?" Michael paused. "She's unreadable. You get the sense she's drowning slowly, but she's decided to do it gracefully." Poirot smiled faintly. "And Miss Halberd?" "She's sharp. I wouldn't want to be her subject without permission." Poirot folded his hands. "You speak of others easily." "But what of yourself? Where were you when the scream came?" "Changing roles in my tent. I was halfway through developing the midday series." "No witnesses?" But I've got timestamps on the negatives. You're welcome to them." Poirot made a note. "I shall accept that offer." Lennox leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's something else. Yesterday, before the murder, I saw Sir Lucien slip something into the satchel he kept by his chair. Not the sketchbook. Something flat, paper maybe. Then he burned something in the brazier outside." "Did anyone else see?" "Not that I noticed." Poirot tapped the table lightly. "Merci, monsieur. You're more observant than you let on." Eleanor Halberd was last. She entered briskly, brushing sand from her sleeve. "No pleasantries, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "I thought you liked charm." "I like honesty better," Poirot replied. "You observe everything, but you speak only what is safe." "I speak what is publishable, which often omits what is true." She smiled. "Very well. What would you like to know?" "What did Sir Lucien fear?" Eleanor hesitated. "Exposure. He liked the illusion of brilliance. But the truth? Most of his theories were guesswork. Beautiful guesswork, but guesswork." "Did someone threaten to expose him?" "I don't know, but the day before he died, he argued with Faversham, loudly. I didn't hear what it was about." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, mademoiselle. That will be all." As she turned to go, Poirot added, "You will tell me, of course, if you remember anything else." She paused. "I always remember. It's just a matter of when I choose to say so." And with that, She left. Poirot sat alone, the wind fluttering the sides of the tent. He did not yet know why, but already he was beginning to see who. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. The desert sun had not yet risen when a soft knock sounded against Poirot's tent. Captain Faversham entered without waiting to be summoned, military efficiency overriding manners. "We've found something," he said grimly. Poirot, already awake and dressed with his tie perfectly knotted, gave a slight nod. "Something or someone?" "Something first. Someone perhaps next." They walked across the still camp, where only the occasional flicker of a cigarette or rustle of canvas broke the silence. In the shadow behind the medical tent, 2 of Faversham's men stood guard over a shallow hole recently uncovered in the sand. One of them held up a cloth-wrapped parcel. "It was buried less than a foot deep," Faversham explained. "One of the porters noticed disturbed sand near the supply crates." Poirot bent to examine the object. With a careful hand, he unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a dagger, not the ceremonial jewel-encrusted relic they had been searching for, but a long, curved blade with a handle wrapped in worn leather. A practical weapon, and recently cleaned. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Not ancient, but certainly deadly." Faversham's expression darkened. "It matches the shape of the wound in Sir Lucien's back. Our camp medic confirmed." Poirot's fingers brushed the blade. "And whose tent was closest to where this was buried?" Faversham gave a reluctant answer. "Basil Renton's." Poirot stood slowly. "I must speak with him. Now." They found the archaeologist inside his tent, bent over a box of fragile pottery shards. When he looked up and saw Poirot's face, followed by Faversham's stern presence, the colour drained from his cheeks. Poirot did not accuse. He never began with accusation. "Monsieur Renton, I must ask, why did you not mention you possessed another blade?" Renton blinked rapidly. I didn't. That's not mine." "It was found buried not 20 feet from your tent." "Then someone put it there." "You understand how convenient that sounds? I swear to you, I've never seen that weapon before in my life." Poirot studied him. Renton's hands were trembling, his voice too loud, too quick, the panic of the guilty, or the very frightened. Faversham crossed his arms. He had a motive. He felt Lucien was trying to steal credit. They argued. Poirot interjected calmly. "So have many great minds, Captain." "That alone is not enough." "But the dagger!" Poirot raised a hand. "A planted weapon is only useful to the one who needs someone else to take the fall." He turned back to Renton. "Is there anyone who might wish to implicate you?" Renton's voice was hoarse. "I don't know. Michael always resented my position. Eleanor thinks I'm a fraud. Even Lucien used to mock my field notes. But murder? That's not a rivalry. That's madness." Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "What did you find in the tomb, Monsieur Renton?" Before the relic vanished. Renton hesitated. "Are fragments, symbols carved into the stone walls, and a niche, empty, but clearly meant to house something valuable. The dagger, most likely." "Did you take photographs?" "Number Michael had exclusive documentation rights. I only sketched the layout." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "May I see it?" Renton produced a worn, leather-bound notebook. Poirot flipped through until he reached a sketch showing the layout of the tomb chamber. In the centre was a raised plinth, a niche carved like a cradle for the blade. Poirot tapped it gently. "What makes you so certain the dagger was meant to lie here?" "Because of the inscription," Renton said. "It translated roughly to, 'He who bears the blade rules the silence beneath the sand.' Lucien found that very poetic." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Rules the silence, a phrase both chilling and curiously personal. They left the tent soon after, the dagger carefully wrapped and handed off to the medic for safekeeping. Poirot did not arrest Renton, but the others had seen the stir, the whispers, and suspicion was now planted like a weed. That evening, Eleanor Halberd approached Poirot just as the lamps were being lit. Her eyes were sharp, her tone curt. "I assume you're letting him go." "For now." "He didn't do it?" Poirot looked at her over his teacup. "No?" "He's too careful, too cowardly. Murder requires a line to be crossed. Renton couldn't cross it if you led him by the hand." Poirot nodded. "And who could?" She hesitated. "That depends. Was Lucien killed for ambition or for fear?" Poirot tilted his head. "You see the line clearly, mademoiselle, but you step around it." Eleanor's mouth twitched. "Journalists survive by not getting stabbed in the back." Poirot smiled faintly. "But they rarely stay quiet when they know something." She leaned closer. "Then let me give you something. The night before Lucien died, I heard Lady Willoughby's voice, raised, furious. She said, 'I'll not be humiliated again.' Lucien didn't argue. He just laughed." Poirot's smile faded. "Merci, that is most helpful." As she disappeared into the shadows, Poirot sat in silence. The blade had surfaced, but like all puzzles, its presence revealed only a deeper void beneath. Chapter 7. The Laugh That Echoed. The desert dusk settled like silk over the camp, casting long shadows that danced between canvas tents and crates of fragile relics. Beneath the veil of gathering stars, the tension hung thicker than the heat of midday, and in the middle of it Hercule Poirot moved like a still eye in a spinning storm, calm, precise, observant. The dagger had been found, but instead of narrowing the circle, it had cast suspicion wider. A camp of 8 had become a nest of nerves. He sat alone outside his tent, sipping from a small porcelain cup, Egyptian mint, sharp and cool, when footsteps approached. Michael Quain, the expedition photographer, loomed in the lamplight, his frame lean and angular, camera swinging at his side like a weapon of another kind. "Mind if I join you?" Quain asked. "Not at all," Poirot said pleasantly, gesturing to the stool beside him. Quain dropped onto it with a sigh. "You've stirred things up." Poirot smiled faintly. "Murder tends to do that. I merely follow the ripples." Quain looked out into the sand. "You want to know what I think?" "Always. It wasn't Renton. He's the type to faint at the sight of blood, not spill it." "Many have said so." "But he's not innocent either. He's always hiding something. Fear, mostly. Guilt, perhaps." Poirot turned slightly. "You were close to Sir Lucien?" Quain shrugged. "As close as anyone was. He didn't do friends, but he liked my eye for detail." Poirot tilted his head. "That must have been useful." Quain gave a short laugh. "You think I'm keeping something?" "I think everyone is. The question is what and why." Quain hesitated, then leaned forward. "I heard something. The night Lucien died." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "I was up late developing plates. My tent's on the far side, near the stones. Around midnight, maybe a little after, I heard laughter. Not ordinary laughter, strange, mocking. It echoed off the tomb walls." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "I thought it was Lucien at first," Quain continued, "but it didn't sound right. It was off, dry, like someone enjoying a private joke." "Did you go to check?"
I started to, but then a shadow moved between the tents. I thought I saw someone heading toward the tomb. I figured it was one of the guards." "Did you recognize them?" Quain shook his head. "Too dark." Poirot leaned back. "And why not say this sooner?" I wasn't sure what I heard, and after the blade was found near Renton's tent, well, everyone assumed that was the answer. But you did not. No. Quain looked up at the stars. Lucien was arrogant, sure, but he was sharp. That tomb, he said it was going to rewrite everything. There are people who wouldn't want that. Poirot nodded slowly. Did he tell you what he found? Number, but he was different that last day. Jumpy, kept checking his notes like he thought someone was watching. Poirot turned his gaze inward. He remembered Lucien's journal, torn, pages missing, secrets buried in ink as much as in sand. Quain stood. You want to see something strange? He asked. Poirot followed him to the developing tent, where a row of prints hung drying like silent ghosts. Quain pulled one down and handed it to him. It was a shot of the tomb entrance at dawn, long shadows stretched across the sand, the stonework bathed in cold light. Poirot studied it. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he saw it. A figure, barely discernible, standing near the entrance, not facing the camera, half-turned, head tilted, caught mid-step. But unmistakably there. None of the team was near the tomb that morning, Quain said. Everyone was still in the mess tent. Poirot looked up. Who developed this? I did, just this morning. Poirot tapped the edge of the photograph. You did well not to destroy this? Quain gave a humourless smile. I know better than to erase a mystery Poirot hasn't solved yet. They stood in silence for a moment. Poirot then said, Merci, Monsieur Cain. You have given me much to consider. Later that evening, Poirot made quiet rounds through the camp. He passed Lady Willoughby's tent and heard nothing, past Eleanor's and caught the scratching of a pen. Renton's was dark, only one tent still glowed, Dr. Amal Zacharia's. He paused outside, just long enough to hear her voice, low, careful, as if dictating to herself. In Arabic, a prayer perhaps, or something else. He did not intrude, not yet. Instead, he walked to the edge of the dig site. The wind had calmed, and the desert stretched out like a sea of forgotten stories. Poirot stood alone in the silence, listening. And in that quiet, a single laugh echoed in his memory. Dry, mocking, and far too human. Chapter 8. The Woman with the Broken Compass. The desert dawn arrived in a hush, painting the camp in hues of rose and gold. Yet beneath the beauty, unease clung to the morning like sweat. The death of Sir Lucien had shifted the atmosphere. What was once a shared dream of discovery had hardened into something brittle, something
wary. Poirot stood outside the mess tent, his moustaches perfectly waxed, his shoes spotless despite the sand. He sipped his coffee slowly, scanning the camp with the quiet precision of a man who missed nothing. His eyes settled on Eleanor Dalton, who sat alone near a crate, meticulously sketching one of the dig's stone fragments in her journal. Her face was calm, but her movements lacked the fluidity of someone at peace. They were sharp, hesitant, and Poirot, ever attuned to the tremble beneath stillness, made his approach. Mademoiselle Dalton, he said gently, a moment of your time, if I may. She looked up. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. You are very diligent, he observed, nodding toward the sketch. Even in the shadow of such a tragedy. She gave a soft laugh. Sir Lucien would have insisted. He hated delays. Oui, a man of vision, and perhaps obsession. Her pencil paused. Obsession is how breakthroughs happen. Poirot sat on the crate opposite her, folding his hands. Tell me, mademoiselle, how long have you known Dr. Zachariah? Eleanor tilted her head slightly, caught off guard. Only since the beginning of the expedition. She was appointed by the Cairo Antiquities Bureau. You seem to work closely? She's brilliant, One of the few people here who treated me as more than just an assistant. Poirot nodded slowly. And did Sir Lucien share that appreciation? Eleanor's lips tightened. He respected her knowledge, but he didn't like being challenged. And yet she was his co-lead. She earned it. Sir Lucien didn't have a choice. The Bureau made it a condition of the permit. Ah, Poirot said, and what of the compass? Eleanor blinked. The compass? Poirot reached into his pocket and retrieved a small brass device, one of the older survey compasses used on the site. Its glass face was cracked, the needle jammed to the side. I found this buried beneath a layer of silt in the northwest trench, Poirot said. Not discarded, but deliberately hidden. Eleanor frowned. That's strange. The compasses are checked and stored each evening. Indeed. And yet this one, broken and hidden, suggests haste or fear. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the cracked glass. It's not mine, she said finally. Poirot nodded. It belonged, I believe, to Sir Lucien. His initials are etched faintly here, see? He tilted it toward her, revealing the barely visible LG. Her breath caught. Then, why bury it? Poirot stood. That is the question, is it not? He left her pondering, moving toward the records tent, where Dr. Amal Zakaria knelt by a spread of parchment maps, murmuring softly to herself. She looked up as Poirot entered, her expression carefully neutral. Monsieur Poirot, she said, you seek more shadows? Non, doctora, Poirot replied. I seek the outline
of truth, faint though it may be. She returned to her map. Then you'll need patience. Truth in archaeology is never immediate. Poirot walked slowly around the table. Last night you were speaking in your tent. I could not help but hear. Amal glanced at him. I recite prayers. They calm my mind. Poirot inclined his head. Understandable, and yet I wonder, was your mind troubled last night? Her gaze narrowed. You're implying something. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a fragment of stone beside her map. You catalogued this as coming from trench A-5, but I noticed earlier this week the trench was closed after a partial collapse. Amal's jaw tightened. That fragment was misfiled. It was found near the edge. Poirot set it down. I believe you, but such errors at a dig of this importance are curious. Amal stood. You want to know what I think? Her voice had an edge now. Lucien discovered something in that tomb, something ancient, yes, but also dangerous. And instead of informing the Bureau, he chose to keep it secret, control it. That is why he dismissed my warnings. He tampered with what was sealed. Poirot met her eyes. And what was sealed, Doctora? She looked away. Something that should have remained buried. Poirot studied her face and saw not guilt, but fear. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering grains of sand across the dig site. As Poirot stepped out, he found Captain John Hanbury returning from the nearby ridge, binoculars slung over his shoulder, face tight with concern. We may have another problem, Hanbury said, pulling Poirot aside. One of the camels is missing, so is a water canister. Poirot blinked. Someone has left the camp. That's the assumption. Poirot looked toward the horizon. Then the game has changed. Someone is running, Captain, and in the desert one does not run unless pursued, by guilt or by danger. And as the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the ruin and bones of the tomb, Poirot knew the answer was no longer buried in sand alone. It was unraveling in silence, in missing tools, in frightened glances, and in the cracked glass of a compass that once pointed true. Chapter 9. The Mirage of the Missing Hour. The desert sun now stood overhead, its heat oppressive and unrelenting. The camp had fallen into a tense quiet, as if each tent, each breath, waited for something. For Poirot, the moment had come to dissect the timeline of the night Sir Lucien died. Every conversation, every flicker of movement, every word exchanged. He gathered the key members of the expedition in the shaded central tent. Captain Hanbury stood with arms folded, ever alert. Dr. Amal Zakaria leaned against a crate, silent. Eleanor Dalton arrived late, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. Father Giroux remained outside, pacing under the tattered awning, muttering a rosary in French. Poirot faced them with
the calm of a surgeon before the first incision. "Mes amis," he began, "what I seek is simple, yet, as always, elusive. I seek time, or rather an hour. One single hour lost in the night like water through sand." He drew a crude outline of the dig site on the chalkboard, marking the main tents and the tomb's entrance. "Sir Lucien dined with us all at approximately 8:30, Poirot said. "He retired early, as was his habit. By 10 o'clock, he was found dead by Captain Hanbury. A knife wound, no sign of struggle, nothing stolen, clean, precise. But here is the question: what occurred between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock? Eleanor's eyes flicked to Dr. Zakaria. "We were all in our tents." "Ah," Poirot said. "But that is the assumption, not the fact. Consider this. There are no watches here, no radio time signals. We rely on estimation. And estimations, mes amis, are vulnerable to misdirection." Captain Hanbury exhaled. "I checked the perimeter shortly after 9. The eastern torch had blown out, and I relit it. On the way back, I passed Dr. Zakaria's tent. She was inside, speaking Arabic. I assumed praying." Amal nodded. "That is true." Poirot turned to Eleanor. "And you, mademoiselle?" She hesitated. "I was reviewing notes in my tent. I heard voices, and later I saw someone walking toward the tomb." "Who?" Poirot asked gently. "I don't know. It was only a shadow. It moved quickly, toward the tomb, then back." "Back?" Poirot echoed. "You saw them return?" She nodded. "Yes, moments before the scream." Poirot allowed a beat of silence. "Curious, for no footprints were found leading away from the tomb, only toward it." The tent was still. "Someone," he said softly, "left the tomb by another route, or never truly left." Hanbury frowned. "There's only one entrance." "Perhaps, but not necessarily. Many burial sites have hidden side passages or trap doors. We may yet discover one." Eleanor, her voice barely above a whisper, added, "Lucien had blueprints, ancient schematics. He often studied them late into the night." "Do you have access to them?" She shook her head. "He kept them locked in his travel chest." Poirot turned to Hanbury. "May I?" Hanbury nodded, and together they walked to Sir Lucien's tent. The air inside was stale. The chest, a brass-bound trunk at the foot of the cot, remained sealed with an intricate clasp. Poirot knelt and examined it with care, then produced a pin from his lapel. Within seconds, the lock gave a soft click. Inside, rolled maps lay in tight bundles, carefully labelled. Poirot withdrew several, unrolling them with reverence. One in particular bore the faded script, Nekheb Tomb, Interior Hypotheses. Drawn in a shaky but precise hand were multiple chambers, side vaults, and, crucially, what appeared to be a narrow escape shaft leading beyond the main burial room. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Captain, I believe we must inspect the tomb again tonight." Hanbury hesitated. "It's dangerous. The structure is fragile." "Nevertheless," Poirot said, rolling the map, "we cannot solve this mystery in the light. The truth hides in the shadows." As they left the tent, Eleanor approached hurriedly. "Monsieur Poirot, there's something else." He paused. Yes? I didn't say it before because I wasn't sure, but the person I saw returning from the tomb, they limped, just slightly. The walk was uneven. Poirot's eyes lit up, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. Merci, mademoiselle. That is most helpful. Hanbury furrowed his brow. A limp? Only two of us limp here, Giroux and Doctor, Sci-Fi, the osteologist, but he's been in Cairo for days getting supplies. Poirot nodded. Then we are left with the good priest. Yet, what motive would he have? Outside, Father Giraud still paced slowly, rosary in hand, eyes on the sand. His limp was barely perceptible. A relic from a minor injury in youth, perhaps, but now in Poirot's mind it loomed large. Back in the main tent, Poirot addressed the others once more. There is a fracture in the narrative we have been told, a space in time where truth should reside, 1 hour, a shadowy figure, a hidden passage, and now a limp. He tapped his temple. And yet I am not ready to accuse, not yet. Tonight I shall descend into the tomb, alone. Perhaps the tomb will speak where we can not. And with that the meeting dissolved. The sun dipped low once more, and the camp settled into a hush that had nothing to do with rest. For in the hour that followed, each person retreated into their own silence. And in silence, the truth often begins to whisper. Chapter 10, Beneath the Seal of the Jackal. The moon was sharp as a blade, cutting through the desert sky in cold silver. The tomb loomed like a sleeping beast at the far end of the camp, half swallowed by dunes, its entrance marked by twin statues of Anubis, guardian of the dead. Poirot stood at the edge of its yawning mouth, lantern in hand, the rolled blueprint tucked carefully beneath his arm. He had chosen to go alone, against Captain Hanbury's insistent warnings. "It isn't safe, Poirot," the captain had said. "The tomb could collapse. There are snakes, gas pockets, worse." But Poirot had smiled softly and replied, "I fear the living far more than the dead, mon capitaine." Now, stepping inside, he was met with the scent of old dust and dried resin. The air was cool, unmoving. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, as if the tomb exhaled with him. His lantern cast slow, flickering shadows against the hieroglyphs etched in limestone walls, scenes of offerings, gods with jackal heads, golden funerals in boats of light. Poirot moved with measured care through the main chamber, then toward the burial vault where Sir Lucien had been found. The altar was still there, undisturbed. The stain of blood had darkened to near black, seeping into the cracks of the stone. He unrolled the blueprint, held it against the wall, and traced the lines with his fingers. According to Lucien's notes, there should be a secondary chamber, small, perhaps a servant's passage, hidden behind the western mural, the one depicting Osiris weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Poirot stepped closer. Something in the wall's composition struck him as different. He tapped gently. A hollow resonance. Carefully, he ran his fingers along the base of the mural and found what felt like a narrow indentation, no wider than a handspan, nearly invisible in the dim light. He pressed. With a faint groan of stone against stone, a portion of the wall shifted, then opened inward, revealing a narrow, downward-sloping passage, choked with centuries of dust. The air that spilled from it was dry and old, older than the tomb itself, it seemed. Poirot hesitated only a moment before descending. The passage was tight, the ceiling barely allowing him to stand. He followed its winding course for several meters until it opened into a small chamber, barely large enough for 3 people. Here, the air grew colder. The room was empty, save for an upturned ceramic jar, a bronze oil lamp, and, near the back wall, an impression in the dust. A footprint, fresh. Poirot knelt. The tread was deep at the heel, uneven, as if made by someone favoring one leg. A limp. He inhaled quietly. So, someone had been here, not long ago. Perhaps the same night Lucien died. Poirot's eyes swept the small room again. In the corner, buried under loose debris, something caught the lantern's reflection, a glint of polished wood and brass. He brushed away the dust, revealing a carved walking stick. It bore a gold ring near the handle, engraved with the letters G.Y., Father Giroux's initials. Poirot's breath drew still. Not a relic, not a mislaid item, hidden deliberately. He examined the stick more closely. The tip was stained with a smudge, perhaps dirt, perhaps something darker. Blood? Poirot stood and turned back toward the narrow tunnel. As he climbed, thoughts raced in measured order. Why would the priest be in the tomb that night? What purpose did he have for returning? And why hide a walking stick, an object he'd carried openly since their arrival? Back in the main chamber, he emerged into the faint glow of dawn. The air outside had turned cooler, the wind teasing the edges of the tents. Poirot extinguished his lantern and walked calmly back to camp. But as he neared his tent, something made him stop. There, sitting quietly on a crate near the fire pit, was Father Giroux. His head was bowed in thought, fingers running through the beads of his rosary. The walking stick was in his hand, the same walking stick. Poirot approached slowly. "Father," he said softly. Giroux looked up, startled. "Monsieur Poirot, you are awake early. I never sleep well in the desert. The prayers, they linger." Poirot tilted his head.
"And yet you seem at peace this morning." Giroux smiled faintly. "God provides peace when we seek it, and when we atone." Poirot's gaze lingered on the stick. It was smooth, unmarked, with no stain, a perfect twin, or perhaps a replacement. He stepped back slightly. "Father, may I speak with you more fully later today?" "Of course, my son," the priest said, returning to his prayer. Poirot retreated. In his tent, he placed the recovered stick beside his cot. Two identical canes, one found in a secret chamber, one now held in plain view, one telling the truth, the other perhaps hiding it. The sun began to rise over the dunes, casting gold across the dig site. And in that pale light, Poirot knew the time for quiet observation had ended. Soon, the time for revelation would come. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. Dawn found Poirot in the privacy of his tent, comparing two canes laid side by side upon his cot. Identical at first glance, carved dark wood, brass ferrule, gold ring below the grip. Yet the details betrayed kinship without sameness. The cane retrieved from the hidden chamber bore the shallow engraving GV worn thin with use. The cane Father Giroux carried openly showed the same letters, freshly recut, its shaft fractionally longer. A replacement? Or a twin procured in haste? Poirot wrapped the older stick in a linen roll and slid it beneath a trunk. "For now, my son is a little secret." He next unbound Sir Lucien's field folio. Between site sketches and speculative routes was a narrow slip of papyrus pinned with sealing wax. 5 surnames in pencil: Willoughby, Renton, Faversham, Dalton, Giroux. Poirot's brows lifted. Dalton. Their journalist travelled and published as Miss Eleanor Halberd. Interesting. Sir Lucien had written 2 initials beside the list: C after Willoughby, Hold after Dalton, blackmail ledger, beneficiary schedule, insurance of another sort. By mid-morning, the camp simmered. News of the missing camel, reported yesterday, had spread. Water rations were being tallied, tempers measured. Poirot requested a logistics muster beneath the main awning. Attendance is mandatory. Captain Lawrence Faversham, expedition head, presided, flanked by Hanbury. formerly Medical Corps, now Logistics Lieutenant. The earlier casual habit of calling them both Captain had already sown small confusions in statements. Poirot filed that away. "I regret," Poirot announced, "to inform you that someone left camp boundaries in the night. A beast, a canister, and tracks half swallowed by wind. Until we resolve this, movement is restricted. No solo excursions." Renton bristled. "This is absurd. My work—" "Your work will keep," Poirot said mildly. "Lives may not." He let silence press. Eyes moved. Eleanor's pencil froze. Dr. Amal Zachariah folded her arms. Father Giroux's fingers tightened on his cane. Poirot's gaze drifted there. "Father, you walk with some
Difficulty? A remnant injury, said Giroux. Old, nothing more. Yet a blessing, Poirot replied, smiling. One leaves a signature in the sand that is unmistakable. Providence keeps the record. Giroux inclined his head, uncertain whether he'd been warned or complimented. After the muster, Poirot made short, pointed rounds, not interrogations, but nudges. With Lady Constance he spoke of estates. If Sir Lucien's great discovery proved authentic, he asked, what then? It would have gone to his foundation, she said flatly. Restricted capital, I'd have seen very little. And if it were discredited? Then the estate falls conventional. I will inherit. She met his eyes. You wish me to say, I am relieved he is dead. I will not give you that. I ask only, Poirot murmured, whether he held your future hostage to his reputation. Her silence answered. With Eleanor, Halbert, Dalton? Poirot was blunter. Mademoiselle, your travel permit lists you as Eleanor Dalton, your articles as Halbert. Pourquoi? She didn't flinch. She grinned. You checked the manifest? Naturellement. Halbert is my column name, she said. Dalton is legal. Lucien insisted the permits match my passport. He enjoyed reminding me which name the bank recognizes. Did he hold debts over you? Not debts. Access. He opened doors, he could close them. And he wrote hold beside Dalton in his folio, Poirot said casually. For the first time she lost colour. You've been in his papers. Oui. She drew a slow breath. Then you know more than I do. With Faversham, Poirot spoke of security logs. The officer produced neat times, too neat. You patrol at 9, 11 and 1, always. Routine keeps people safe. Or it tells them when the paths are clear, Poirot replied. Faversham's jaw ticked. If you're accusing. I accuse nothing. I observed that the 9 o'clock round coincided with every statement given. Such coincidence is rarely accidental. By late afternoon, strain cracked the camp's formalities. Renton cornered Eleanor, hissing that she'd turned Poirot on him. She retorted that he'd planted knives. Hanbury separated them. Lady Constance refused supper. Dr. Zachariah demanded the dig be sealed until officials arrived. Giroux led dusk prayers unasked, half attended, half avoided. Poirot watched all of it. When the shouting swelled again, Faversham and Renton this time, over chain of custody for the recovered blade, Poirot stepped between them and struck the table with his palm. Enough. We dine together tonight. We remain within the torchlight after dark, and at moonrise I shall speak, not to accuse, but to clarify. Someone here acts from fear. Fear breeds haste. Haste breeds error. And error, he said softly, betrays murder. He let the words settle like dust. As they dispersed, Poirot returned briefly to his tent, withdrew the hidden cane, and compared once more the wear beneath the grip. The older dent matched a bruise he had noticed on Giroux's palm 2 days earlier. The newer cane showed none. So, he whispered, who borrowed whose faith to walk in darkness? Outside, night gathered. The torches would be lit soon. Poirot intended to let the heat of suspicion rise just a little further until the next touch cracked it. Tomorrow he will press on. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The desert evening arrived in solemn silence, broken only by the cautious crackle of the communal fire. Tents stood like sentinels beneath a bruised sky. Within the circle of flame and shadow, Hercule Poirot sat composed, polished boots crossed at the ankle, gaze half lowered. Around him, the others had gathered, some seated reluctantly, others standing just beyond the fire's reach. "Thank you," he began, hands steepled. "Tonight, we reflect not merely on a tragedy, but on a chain of events, deliberate, entwined, and above all, personal." The wind stirred, rustling canvas and nerves alike. No one here is a stranger to ambition. Sir Lucian had his vision of empire, academic, financial, or eternal. Many of you were tied to that vision, but a man's ambition is also his leash. To pull it, one must know where it leads. He turned his head slightly, eyes glinting. "Let us start with the cane, or, rather, canes. One older, worn and engraved, the other newer, modelled in imitation. We are to believe that Father Giroux has always used the latter. Yet in the chamber where the dagger was found, the elder cane lay abandoned. How curious!" Giroux stiffened. "Monsieur Poirot," I explained. Poirot raised a finger. "And your explanation I accept. That your injury is genuine, that you require a cane. But why, too? Who walked at night with the older one and discarded it before the body was discovered? And why do you bear a bruise upon the palm that matches the worn shaft?" The priest hesitated, throat working. "I lent it. Some nights I walk with pain, others I rested in my tent." Poirot nodded. "A convenient lapse, perhaps. Let us leave it for now." He turned to Renton. "Your obsession with the blade is notable. You have insisted it be catalogued, measured, preserved. And yet, you were among the first to the body and swore it was missing then. Who restored it?" "I don't know," Renton muttered. "Someone planted it to cause trouble." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "You examined Sir Lucian's wrist wound with a peculiar certainty. You described it as a deflection wound, words not commonly used by those outside medical or forensic circles. Curious, too, that your earlier publications show similar phrasing," Dr. Zachariah interjected. "I noticed that as well. His language mimics pathology notes, but he is no doctor." Renton glared at her. "I read. I will prepare." "Indeed," Poirot said. "Or you've seen such wounds before, up close." Tension crackled like dry kindling. Poirot let it burn a moment. "And Lady Constance, you told me that you would gain little from your husband's discoveries, at least while they remained enshrined within his foundation. But a scandal, an accusation of fraud, would dissolve the restrictions. If Lucien were discredited or dead, the estate would revert to you." She didn't blink. "If you're asking if I wanted him gone, yes, but wanting is not the same as acting." "No," Poirot said softly, "but others may act for us, especially when emboldened by betrayal, secrets, or desperation." His gaze drifted to Eleanor. "Miss Dalton, or shall we say Halberd, your dual identity is not a crime, but in Sir Lucian's private notes, your name bears the mark hold, suggesting he held power over you for perhaps leverage. Did he threaten to expose your work, your reputation, perhaps a relationship?" Eleanor's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Poirot stood now, moving to the fire's edge. "And what of Faversham, a man who keeps perfect records, so perfect that every patrol log aligns with every suspect's story, too perfect, suggesting not a pattern of truth, but a script rehearsed?" "I did what was necessary. Faversham said sharply. "Order is everything in a place like this." "Order, yes," Poirot murmured. "Or control, especially when the true order of events threatens to unravel the expedition's purpose." He turned, now facing the full circle. "We are nearly there, mes amis. The motive is present, the means accessible, the opportunity recorded and denied. But above all, we are dealing with a human crime, one born not of logic, but of emotion. It is not the relic that killed Sir Lucien. It is a person. A person whose moment of fear or fury or retribution tipped the scale." Poirot stepped back, his voice now like a thread drawn tight. "Tomorrow I shall present the order of events as I see them. Who entered the chamber, who altered the scene, who left the trail they believed erased. But tonight—" He let his eyes pass over each of them. "Tonight I ask only this: reflect. For the truth, she has a way of surfacing when the conscience is stirred, and I believe someone among you is very close to slipping." He gave a small, courteous bow. "Bonne nuit." As Poirot turned and walked into the darkness, the group remained silent behind him, each figure frozen in firelight, faces taut, thoughts racing. And somewhere in that silence, a breath was held too long, a mind spun too fast, and the murderer, for Poirot no longer doubted the presence of one, made their first mistake since the night of Sir Lucien's death. Chapter 13. The past resurfaces. The following morning arrived not with serenity, but with the brittle tension of withheld truths. The wind had picked up overnight, flinging sand across the camp with a kind of petulant fury. The desert, it seemed, had grown impatient. Poirot emerged from his tent, dressed immaculately despite the elements, as if dust were incapable of touching him. He made no announcements, no dramatic summons to the group. Instead, he moved quietly, intentionally, beginning with a walk to the outer perimeter, where Sergeant Faversham was scanning the dunes through a pair of battered binoculars. "Keeping watch for phantoms, mon capitaine?" Poirot said mildly. Faversham lowered the glasses. "Drifters mostly, nomads. They sometimes steal from deserted campsites." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "How very diligent. But tell me, on the night of Sir Lucien's death, you claim to have logged your rounds at 10:30 precisely. Were you alone?" Faversham hesitated. "Yes, standard patrol. I walk the perimeter, note activity, and confirm the guards are in position." "No deviation?" The sergeant's jaw flexed. "None." Poirot smiled. "Ah, then I must be mistaken, for I was certain one of the camp's supply logs, the one bearing the midnight ink blot, bore your signature, backdated to appear routine." Faversham's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "That someone needed to create an alibi, and who better than the man who controls the clocks and the reports?" Before Faversham could respond, Poirot raised a hand and moved on. He had planted a seed, one that would grow under pressure. In the medical tent, he found Dr. Zacharia poring over a tattered journal, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue clinging to her. "You do not sleep well," Poirot said. "I'm a doctor," she replied, not looking up. "We learn to live without rest." "And yet even you seemed rattled last night. Renton's language, perhaps, the talk of wounds and deflection." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It wasn't just his language. It was the way he described it. He spoke as if he'd seen it, not read it in a book." "Then he has your suspicion?" "I don't trust him. He's ambitious, reckless, and he hated that Sir Lucien always kept him one rung lower than he thought he deserved." Poirot smiled faintly. "A familiar condition in such expeditions. Proximity to greatness often breeds resentment." He turned the journal toward him. What do you study? A diary, Zachariah said. Lucien's early years at Oxford. He spoke about desert mythology, but also about betrayal, a friend who took credit for his work, who nearly cost him his first publication. Poirot leaned closer. The name? She tapped the entry. Initials only. J. H. Poirot's expression didn't change, but a ripple moved behind his eyes. He tucked the thought away for later and left her to her reading. Outside, the wind had stirred the sand into waves, curling along the base of the tents. Eleanor was standing near the dig site's boundary, her scarf trailing like a banner, eyes fixed on the distance. Miss Dalton, Poirot said softly, or Miss Halberd. She turned, face taut. So you've uncovered that? I have, and I have not judged it. We all have our masks, no? She smiled grimly. And what do you think mine hides? A brilliant researcher, and someone who once submitted an article, anonymously, to a journal Sir Lucien edited. It was plagiarized 6 months later under his name. You never confronted him? No, she said. I was 23, I thought I'd imagined it. But I never submitted again. Poirot looked at her with a kind of mournful compassion. You see now, do you not, how many of you hold a blade? If not in hand, then in heart? She looked away. I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I believe you, he said. But the past, it clings to us, does it not? Even here, where the sand tries to bury everything. He left her standing with the wind in her hair. Later that afternoon, Poirot returned to the chamber. This time he came alone, lantern in hand, his polished shoes crunching softly over the stone threshold. The air was cool, reverent, as if the room itself had been holding its breath since the death. He examined the dagger again. The placement was almost theatrical, as though someone had posed it for effect. Not hastily returned, but deliberately reinserted. He knelt beside the slab, traced a faint indentation in the dust, a scuff mark just beyond the relic, inconsistent with Faversham's report, and then a scrap of cloth, half buried in a crack of stone, faded burgundy, like the inner lining of a jacket. Poirot turned it gently between his fingers. Not enough to name the wearer. Not yet. But another voice added to the chorus of inconsistencies. He stood slowly, eyes rising to the murals painted on the chamber walls. Images of judgment, of divine punishment, of masked figures offering sacrifices. Symbolism, he murmured, always the key. As he stepped back into the light, Poirot did not yet know who had killed Sir Lucien. But he was certain now of one thing. The killer did not act alone. Chapter 14. A second pact. The desert sun had begun to tip westward, casting long, slanting shadows across the canvas tents and cracked earth. The wind had lessened to a whisper now, as though the storm of the previous night had emptied the skies of their voice. Yet in the silence, Poirot felt something deeper stirring, a concealed presence, a breath beneath the sand. He sat beneath the expedition's communal awning, watching the others from behind a porcelain cup of lukewarm tea. Conversations were hushed now, too carefully measured to be casual. The shock of Sir Lucien's death had evolved into something more corrosive. Mistrust. Everyone felt it. No one admitted it. When Renton emerged from the medical tent carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle, Poirot's interest sharpened. You handle it?
As though it were delicate, Poirot said quietly, approaching him. It is, Renton said, slightly startled. One of the lesser steelies from the secondary chamber. I found it tucked into the sand this morning, almost as if it had been buried intentionally. Odd Poirot eyed the bundle. You did not notify Dr. Zachariah? Renton hesitated. I was going to, but she and Faversham were having words. Poirot raised a brow. And you prefer to avoid conflict, monsieur? I prefer not to be dragged into it, Renton replied, lowering his voice. That woman has more authority than she knows what to do with. If she weren't constantly correcting everyone, I imagine Sir Lucien would still be alive. Poirot tilted his head. A curious thing to say. Do you suggest that Zacharia made enemies? She made Lucien small, Renton said, his voice harder now. And he didn't like being outshone. Poirot gave a soft nod. And yet in death, she is the one silenced. Renton flushed and walked off toward the artifact tent, leaving Poirot alone again with his thoughts. As evening descended, Poirot invited Dr. Zacharia and Miss Dalton to join him for a private supper. An unusual gesture, but one that neither woman declined. They sat on fold-out chairs beneath a canopy of lanterns, their plates holding remnants of couscous and spiced lamb. I have been thinking, Poirot began, setting down his fork, of Sir Lucien, and of the dig site, and of the tapestry of resentment we have now begun to unpick. Miss Dalton gave a weary smile. You think one of us murdered him out of jealousy? Not quite jealousy, he said, folding his napkin. But there is a pattern. Several of you bore wounds from Sir Lucien's ambition, deep ones. And wounds, mesdames, are curious things. They do not always bleed where they are made. Sometimes they fester, far away, long after. Zacharia's eyes narrowed. You're saying this was premeditated? Poirot inclined his head. Possibly. But there is something else. Something more dangerous. He paused. Have either of you heard of the Adrathi Pact? Dalton stiffened. Of course. It's one of the older desert legends, an oath between co-conspirators, bound by blood and secrecy. It's mostly dismissed as folklore. But not entirely dismissed, Poirot said gently. A promise forged in shadow to achieve something impossible. Its power lies not in mysticism, but in loyalty. Two or more, bound by a shared purpose. A pact strong enough to kill for. Zacharia leaned forward. Are you suggesting Lucien's murder wasn't the act of one person? Poirot nodded slowly. That is precisely what I suggest. One hand may have struck, but another guided, or concealed, or wait. Dalton's eyes flicked sideways. And you think the others might be part of it? Possibly, but more importantly, I believe Lucien discovered the pact existed, and that discovery not...
The artifact may have sealed his fate. Silence fell. Poirot rose from his seat and reached into the folds of his coat, withdrawing the fragment of burgundy cloth he had found in the tomb chamber. This, he said, placing it on the table, was found beside the dagger. Zacharia reached for it, but Poirot drew it back slightly. I have not made the identity public, he said, and I will not yet, but I believe it came from someone who tried to stage the scene, someone who wanted the death to appear symbolic, ritualistic, to blur truth with myth. Dalton's voice was hushed. And what now? Now, Poirot said, we look not just for motive, but for collusion. Someone is hiding the truth behind the veil of ancient curses, and it is time we pulled back the veil. That night, Poirot returned to his tent and lit a single candle. The flickering flame cast long shadows on the canvas walls as he opened a small journal and wrote a single line. The two worked together. One killed. One silenced the rest. He paused, then added, but one among them regrets it. Outside, the desert wind returned, soft at first, then rising as if the sand itself had begun to remember. Chapter 15. The Cry Beneath the Sand. The next morning dawned harsh and white, the sky a colourless sheet above the ridge of dunes. The sun rose early and without apology, baking the sand and stone before the camp had fully stirred. Poirot stepped out of his tent and noticed it immediately. Something had shifted. Not physically, but atmospherically. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt expectant. He crossed the camp slowly, hands behind his back, nodding politely to a bleary-eyed Faversham who was nursing a cup of bitter tea. Miss Dalton stood near the excavation tent, reviewing a stack of field notes, her expression unusually tight. A single sharp voice broke the hush. It was Zachariah shouting from the dig site. "Renton, get down here, now!" Poirot's feet moved swiftly. By the time he reached the edge of the trench, Zachariah was crouched beside a freshly disturbed section of stone. Her gloves were streaked with earth and perspiration. Renton had just joined her, wide-eyed and speechless. Poirot peered over the edge and saw what had summoned the alarm. A collapsed section of wall, behind which a narrow hollow had been exposed, barely larger than a crawl space, and within it, wedged between stone slabs, was a human skeleton. It was not ancient. Zachariah stood upright, brushing off her knees. "It's not mummified, no wrappings, modern clothes. Judging from the condition, it's been here. Maybe 5, 6 years. Poirot looked down with a solemn frown. A body sealed within a forgotten chamber, not catalogued, not marked, as though someone wished to bury it twice. Renton rubbed his jaw. How in hell did no one find this before? "No one was looking," Zachariah snapped. "This chamber was only partially mapped by Sir
Lucien. He didn't even bother with the substructures. He dismissed them as drainage ducts." Poirot crouched at the edge and narrowed his eyes at the exposed skull. "Miss Dalton," he called over his shoulder, "would you be so kind as to retrieve Sir Lucien's excavation journal?" She nodded and vanished toward the artifact tent. Zachariah crossed her arms. There's more to this than poor oversight. This wasn't just missed. It was hidden, intentionally. Poirot nodded slowly. A skeleton, hidden in a tomb. Perhaps not the first death to be concealed here. Faversham arrived moments later, puffing from the short walk. "What in God's name?" Poirot gestured downward. "A second mystery, my friend. One that predates our tragedy, and one that may yet illuminate it." Miss Dalton returned, with a leather-bound journal, its edges worn, its spine cracked. Poirot flipped through it carefully, scanning pages of looping script. "Here," he murmured, stopping at a map. "The floor plan of the tomb's first tier. Note this alcove, marked as unstable, slated for ceiling." Zachariah leaned over. "But it wasn't unstable. Look at the foundation. Whoever sealed this chamber did so intentionally." Renton looked pale. "So then, who is it? This person down there?" Poirot rose. "That is the next question, but I suspect it is not one wholly unknown to you." Miss Dalton glanced toward the trench. 5 or 6 years ago. That would have been around the first survey, wouldn't it?" "Indeed," Poirot said. "When Sir Lucien made his preliminary visit, he brought only a small team, 2 students, a translator, and a local guide, one of whom was reportedly lost in a sandstorm." Zachariah stiffened. "I've read that report. They assumed the guide wandered off. It was never confirmed." Poirot's voice was soft. "Perhaps he never left. Perhaps Lucien knew." A heavy silence fell. Poirot turned to the others. "I must request that no one disturb the chamber further until local authorities can be notified. I will also need access to the remaining records of that first survey." Every document. Faversham nodded absently. His face had drained of all colour. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered alone beside the trench. The bones below told no story, but they had been placed, positioned even, in a strange fetal curl, like someone hiding, or someone mourned. He whispered to himself, "There is grief here, and fear." That evening, Poirot sat alone in the central tent, lit by a single kerosene lamp. He reviewed the personnel files from the earlier expedition. One name was circled in red ink: Samir Dahab, the local guide who had allegedly vanished into a sandstorm. But something else caught Poirot's eye. A field note, scrawled in an uncertain hand, buried in the back of the file. Dahab argued with Lucien again. Over what? I don't know. I fear it is growing dangerous. J. Poirot stared at the
signature. Just a single letter, but it was enough. He closed the folder and steepled his fingers. So it begins to unfold? Beyond the tent walls, the desert winds began to stir once more, curling around the rocks, lifting grains of sand, whispering secrets long buried. Chapter 16. The Map and the Memory. The map was a faded sheet, brittle with age, but the details remained legible beneath the veil of dust. It had been folded so many times that creases cut across the topography like scars. Poirot unfolded it slowly beneath the lantern light, laying it flat atop a crate. The original survey sketch, Sir Lucien's hand, was unmistakable, but now, looking closer, Poirot noticed a pattern too perfect to be accidental. The tomb's main chamber had been detailed with clinical precision, but beyond its borders the annotations grew erratic. Sections were omitted entirely, and in the lower right corner, penned in smaller, less confident handwriting, was a curious addition, a triangle with a mark inside, like an eye. No label, no measurement, just a silent symbol. Miss Dalton stood beside him, arms folded, brows drawn in concern. That mark wasn't in the official report. Indeed, Poirot murmured. And yet here it is, drawn in ink, identical to the annotation regarding Dahab's disappearance. Possibly the same hand. J. She frowned. Who would that be? Sir Lucien's original team only had 2 junior members. One was Henry Renton, the other was... Her face shifted. Jemima Vance. Poirot tilted his head. Vance? She vanished from archaeology shortly after that expedition, did she not? Yes, Dalton said slowly. There were rumours of a breakdown. She left academia entirely. No public statements, no publications, nothing. Poirot tapped the corner of the map. And yet she left this. A clue? A warning? The tent flap rustled. Zachariah entered without knocking, her face taut with a new layer of urgency. I just came from the tool shed. One of our carbon dating kits is missing. Dalton blinked. What? Who would... It was logged out under Faversham's name, but he told me he never requested it. Poirot rose at once, adjusting his cuffs with quiet precision. Then someone else is moving quickly, and perhaps fearing what time might tell. Outside, the air was dry and cracked. Stars had begun to burn in the sky, sharp and cold as obsidian. The dig site lay still beneath the starlight, silent, buried in darkness, save for a few flickering lanterns. Poirot made his way toward Faversham's quarters, passing Renton along the way, who barely nodded as he slipped past, eyes low. Curious? Faversham answered his tent flap with a gruff, "Come in," rubbing his temples as if recovering from a hangover of emotion. Poirot stepped inside without ceremony. "Forgive the hour, monsieur, but may I inquire whether you are missing any other equipment?" Faversham squinted at him. "Only what?"
Zachariah mentioned. That blasted carbon tester, but I didn't request it. That thing's like gold out here. Strictly controlled. Poirot looked around the cluttered tent, his eyes lingering on the notebooks spread across the desk. And who would have access to the equipment logs? Dalton and Zachariah, maybe Renton in a pinch. Poirot hummed softly and took a slow step forward. Did you know a woman by the name of Jemima Vance? Faversham looked taken aback. Vance? Good God, yes, she was brilliant. Nervous, though, quiet. She was with Lucien during the initial survey, wasn't she? Why? Poirot studied the man's eyes. There are echoes of her in the records, handwritten notes, suppressed observations. I believe she may have known something about the fate of Samir Dahab, something she was too frightened to speak openly about. Faversham swallowed, unease creeping into his voice. I don't like where this is going. Nor I, mon ami. But we must follow where the truth leads us. Poirot exited into the dark and circled quietly toward the excavation tent. Something about Renton's hurried posture had disturbed him. When Poirot arrived, the tent flap was closed. He listened for a moment. Silence. Inside, the lantern had been left burning low. Boxes of artifacts lined the walls, but on the central table was a freshly unrolled scroll, a parchment fragment pulled from one of the recently excavated burial chambers. More curious still, beside it lay the missing carbon dating kit. Poirot turned and quietly exited. Back at his own quarters, Poirot found Zacharia waiting. She held an envelope in her hand, one that looked old, the paper yellowed, the seal broken. Her voice was low. I found this in the compartment beneath the supply trunk. It's addressed to Sir Lucien, but unsigned. Poirot took it gently, peeled the envelope open, and read, You cannot bury what you stole. The tomb is not yours to command. I warned you once. I will not warn you again. No signature. Just the same triangular symbol at the bottom, the eye. Poirot folded the letter carefully and looked up at Zacharia. It appears, he said softly, that someone believed the tomb itself was cursed, or worse, guarded. Zacharia's voice was thin. Do you think Jemima Vance wrote that? I think, said Poirot, that she may have tried to stop something, and was silenced. Far out across the dunes, a single torchlight bobbed near the far ridge. Poirot watched it with narrowed eyes. Tomorrow, he said, we will find her, or what she left behind. Chapter 17. The Revelation Beneath the Sand. The morning dawned pale over the desert, neither triumphant nor mournful, but still, like a breath held too long. Poirot stood atop a dune as the dig site came into view below, quiet as ever. Yet within that quiet, every detail now pulsed with significance. Zacharia had already assembled the team inside the central tent. Miss
Dalton paced with tightly clasped hands. Faversham sat rigid, jaw set in dread. Renton stood apart, not looking at anyone. Poirot entered silently, the ancient map in one hand, the letter in the other. He placed both on the table before them. "Mes amis," he said gently, "you have all been touched by this desert, by its mystery, its heat, its buried past. But it is not the dead that trouble us now, it is the living." He turned to Renton. "You feared I suspected you, did you not?" Renton's voice was hoarse. "You kept watching me. Oui, because your guilt was real, but not for what I first thought. You falsified the equipment logs." Yes." He swallowed. "I snuck out the carbon kit. I used it to test the parchment we found yesterday. I thought it might confirm that Sir Lucien's dating was a lie, that he had made something up to justify his excavation rights. I wanted to expose him. An academic ambition, but not murder." Renton met his eyes. "I'm not a killer." Poirot gave a small nod, then turned slowly toward Faversham. "No, the killer was not the jealous apprentice, but the man who had too much to lose." Faversham stared at him, a flicker of something, denial, fear, crossing his face. "You were with Dahab the night he disappeared," Poirot continued. "You said you'd quarrelled, but the truth is he confronted you. He had found the original annotations by Jemima Vance, buried in the old expedition papers. He realized Sir Lucien had suppressed the truth." Poirot picked up the letter. "This letter was never meant for Sir Lucien. It was from Jemima. To you, Mr. Faversham?" Faversham paled. You see, Jemima suspected you even then. She knew you had helped Lucien hide what was in that tomb, a chamber not dedicated to worship nor royalty, but to sacrifice, human sacrifice. She believed you two had desecrated it, taken relics not reported, even hidden skeletal remains to avoid scandal. Poirot stepped closer, voice steady and clear. Years later, Dahab found traces. He confronted you. You panicked, and in the shadow of that cursed tomb, beneath that obsidian sky, you struck him down. Faversham's voice broke through the silence. You can't prove that. No, said Poirot quietly. Not with fingerprints, not with cameras, but with truth. He laid out the final piece. A weathered journal, recovered that morning, from a hidden compartment Jemima had once used, its pages a record of everything she had seen and feared. I found this buried in the side wall of Chamber B, wedged behind a false panel. She had hidden it, as if knowing someone would one day return. She writes of you by name, of your panic, of the things you helped Lucien conceal. Faversham sank back into his chair, lips parted, the last of his resistance cracking like dried clay. Miss Dalton whispered, "My God!" Poirot sighed and adjusted his cuffs. "You did not kill for greed."
Monsieur, you killed for pride, for legacy. You could not bear to have Sir Lucien's name ruined, or your own, but in doing so you became the final curse upon this excavation. Faversham's voice was a dry whisper. I buried him deep. I thought no one would find him. Poirot nodded gravely. But secrets like bones do not stay buried forever. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing across the dunes. Zachariah left to contact the authorities, and Renton followed, stunned into silence. Dalton lingered, eyes on Poirot. You saved this dig from becoming a myth. Poirot gave a small smile. Non, mademoiselle. I only followed the footprints left in the sand. He paused, then looked toward the horizon, where the sun began its ascent. The desert keeps many secrets, but not from Hercule Poirot. And with that, the great detective adjusted his hat, gathered his coat, and walked back toward the tent, leaving behind a mystery no longer whispered in the wind, but spoken in truth. Chapter 18. The Quiet Truth. Beneath the dunes. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the edge of the western horizon, casting long shadows across the carved faces of the desert rock. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft whisper of sand slipping against canvas. Inside the central tent, Hercule Poirot stood before a gathered circle. Miss Dalton, Professor Faversham, young Renton, and Zachariah. The weight of the past days lay heavy in the air, and yet a hush had descended, the kind born only in the moment before truth is spoken. Poirot adjusted his cuffs meticulously. Then he folded his hands behind his back and began. There is no mystery so complex, no motive so concealed, that it cannot be uncovered when one listens. To people, yes, but also to silences, to omissions, to the unsaid. And it was the silence that told me everything. His eyes scanned the room. At first I suspected many, Renton with his private ambitions, Miss Dalton with her unease and access to the tombs, even Zachariah who knows the desert better than any of us, but it was in the smallest inconsistencies that I found clarity. One torn photograph, a journal entry misplaced, a forgotten scuff on the tomb's inner lintel. He paused. But it was not just the forensic. It was a human psychology. He turned to Faversham, who sat still, pale beneath the rim of his hat. You, monsieur, were once the promising assistant of Sir Lucien Vance, loyal, precise, and overshadowed. And when Jemima Vance questioned your findings, no, the truth, you saw in her a threat not just to your career, but to your identity. When she disappeared, It was easy to let Sir Lucien take the blame. He was already haunted by his own legacy. Miss Dalton shifted slightly, her breath catching. Poirot continued, gently, but with purpose. And then Dahab, a man of this land, a son of the soil. He began to unearth the same pattern. He confronted you, perhaps naively believing truth would
When Poirot stepped closer to the table and placed down a piece of bone, Dahab's ring, identified earlier by Zachariah, found hidden in the tool chest under Faversham's tent flap. He never left. You buried him beneath the loose foundation rocks of Chamber 3, where the sand collapses inward after heavy wind, the place no one excavates because it holds no carvings, no gods, no glory. Faversham spoke then, voice low, hollow. He said I had stolen the story of the tomb, that I had rewritten its truth. But they were sacrifices, Poirot. It would have ruined everything. Poirot's voice was steady. And so you chose the path of silence once more. Faversham closed his eyes and for a long moment said nothing. Then he gave a single nod, not of confession, but of surrender. Zachariah quietly stepped outside, no doubt to signal the guards. Poirot turned to the others. Miss Dalton, you protected Jemima's final letter. You believed in her. And though you feared you might be next, you preserved her truth, hidden in the stitching of her old field coat. That coat, mademoiselle, was your shield. And her voice spoke through it, even after all these years. Dalton wiped her eyes, the truth settling in like dusk. Poirot now faced Renton. You, monsieur, are young, eager, rash, perhaps, but there is something sacred in your defiance. Guard it well, and let this lesson mark your journey, not as a shadow, but a lantern. He gathered his things. A hush followed. Then, softly, Poirot spoke once more. It is often said that the desert keeps her secrets, but I say no, the desert speaks. You must only know how to listen, not with the ears, but with the heart. He stepped outside into the cooling air. Behind him, the tent rustled softly. The stars were beginning to appear, silent, unblinking, eternal. Zachariah joined him. You will not return, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot gave a small smile. I think the desert has shown me enough. Some truths must remain where they belong. Buried, but not forgotten. They walked in silence toward the distant lights of the caravanserai, the final golden hour spilling across the dunes like a blessing. And thus ended the mystery beneath the sand, not with thunder, but with quiet. As it should.